Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar, The Rohingya Crisis, Why a U.S. Genocide Determination Matters. My name's Dan Sullivan. I'm with Refugees International. I'm going to just go over a couple of housekeeping issues and then turn over to our moderator and then jump onto the panel myself. First, I want to thank the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum for co-sponsoring this event with Refugees International. Secondly, if there are any questions that come up through this discussion, please enter them through the chat function and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on Refugees International's website at the end. And while I'm mentioning the website, you'll hear throughout this webinar several references to a petition calling upon the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to determine that what has happened to the Rohingya is genocide. And I encourage you to sign that if you haven't already at refugiesinternational.org. And finally, the session will be an hour, so I will get right to it by introducing our moderator. He is a well-renowned actor and a longtime supporter of refugee issues. Sam Waterston is a board member emeritus for Refugees International. He's been supporting Refugees International for the better part of 3 decades, first getting involved when he appeared on the movie The Killing Fields about atrocities in Cambodia, which really gave him a new and personal introduction to these kinds of issues. And I'm told that he holds the record as the longest standing Refugees International board member. So Sam, thank you so much for your support over the years, and thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and welcome all of you. And thanks to Refugees International and to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for co-sponsoring this very important and timely event. We are now less than 2 weeks from the 3-year mark of when the majority of the Rohingya population living in Myanmar was forced from their homes and into exile in Bangladesh. Numerous reports by Refugees International, by the Holocaust Museum, by a UN independent fact-finding mission, and by the State Department itself have highlighted the widespread and well-coordinated atrocities committed against the Rohingya. Refugees International and others have determined that there is no other conclusion than that this is crimes against humanity and genocide. Yet 3 years later, the United States State Department has not made a public determination to call the crimes what they are. Today, we are joined by a panel that will speak to why such a step is so important. I will introduce each panelist just before they speak, but first I've been asked to offer some opening remarks. Not long ago, Eric Schwartz, the president of Refugees International, made a great point, talking to Congress about lost causes, pointing out that the pages of history are full of victories and struggles that were long dismissed as lost causes. Struggles for justice, human rights, liberty, and freedom. Truly lost causes there are. Fascism, despotism, slavery, repression of basic freedoms and basic human rights. They are evils never totally extinguished that require our perpetual vigilance, but it's a plain fact that where people don't give up, perseverance furthers and history favors right. People in the midst of tough struggles for what's right are optimists for good reason. Is there any question about the rights and wrongs in the case of the Rohingya? Anyone in doubt will find today's discussion helpful, instructive, and I bet dispositive. The horribly antiseptic term for what's being attempted in Myanmar is ethnic cleansing. In plain English, what's been done there and continues to be done is crimes against humanity and genocide. When authoritarian governments have tried it, as they have throughout history, attracted perhaps by ethnic cleansing's apparent simplicity and indifferent to its inhumanity, pessimists among us, presenting themselves as realists, have been all too ready to declare the cause finally and definitively lost, when in fact, the fight over forced removals had hardly begun. These final solutions are not solutions at all. It's right that we're meeting today under the auspices of the Holocaust Museum. The history of the Jews, from the pharaohs through the czars and Hitler, is the history of a lost cause that wasn't. When I was a history student in college, reading about the Soviet Union and its gigantic human rights abuses, my assigned reading, while otherwise highly critical, gave the USSR credit for solving one problem the czars never could: the problem of governing a multi-ethnic state. I didn't hear the term ethnic cleansing then, but that's just how Stalin, quote unquote, solved the problem. He moved the natives out of an area, Lithuania, Estonia, Crimea, Poland, and moved Russians in. He tried to force people in occupied Eastern Europe to learn Russian. My history books thought his forced removals and other cruelties had succeeded. They spoke too soon. They thought they were just being realists. They were wrong. Some of the damage Stalin did still does persist, but the story isn't nearly over. And meanwhile, Ukraine is a free country, for all that the Russians keep its heavily Russified eastern territory in a permanent state of war. And so are the Baltic states of Lithuania and Estonia, and so are the states of Central Europe. The people of Belarus are being heard from right now. The pessimist lurking in each one of us needs to remember we were all caught by surprise when the Berlin Wall came down. And all of us, myself included, must beware of confusing pessimism with realism. When for justice to have a chance, what's required is hope, sweat, and faithfulness. I don't have anything to brag about in that department, but Refugees International most definitely does. An advocate for refugees, hope for the despairing, maintained and furthered by hard work on refugees issues every day. A part of that work is what's being asked of the United States State Department right now. It's not a big lift. It's only to attest to the facts, to call what's been done to the Rohingya in Burma by its real name: genocide. Compared to what the Rohingya suffer every day, whether they're in the news or not in the news, it really isn't much. But if we do our bit, when their story joins the many others in history where justice prevailed against the odds, the people at RI, the 80+ other organizations in the fight, and our own beloved country will be part of how it happened. It's not too late to help. Now, I'd like to turn to the people you actually came here to hear from, our distinguished panelists, and to hear them speak in a way that I can't, from their own direct experience. First, let me hand the mic over to Dan Sullivan, and thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you again to everyone for joining today. It's a real honor to be on this stellar panel. You may all recognize Sam and Tom as well-accomplished actors and also as passionate advocates on refugee issues and supporters of Refugees International's work. And then in Yasmine and Weiwei, we have just an incredible voices leading activist efforts among the Rohingya. I've had the honor of working with them and have closely followed all the work that they've been doing, and I'm really looking forward to their comments. Before we get to them, I will just cover some of the reasons why we think it's so important to have a genocide determination. We are here to draw attention to the fact that the Rohingya people have experienced unspeakable atrocities, and they're still waiting for justice, and they're still in danger. We want to call upon the United States State Department to call these crimes what they are, and that's genocide, to reach a genocide determination. As I mentioned at the start, we have along with 80+ other organizations, a campaign going forward, trying to get Secretary Pompeo to make that determination. There's a petition on our website that you can reach, refugeesinternational.org/call-it-genocide. We are also working with legal experts and with faith groups that will have letters coming out in support of this as well. So I ask you to join in those efforts. The fact is, we believe that a genocide determination is the single most influential, important, immediate step that the US government can take towards resolving the Rohingya crisis. I'll spend the few minutes I have just highlighting 4 main reasons why that is. First, accountability. Second, for the purpose of preventing further atrocities. Third, to rally global attention and action. And finally, in solidarity. So first, a genocide determination by the United States would recognize a crime for what it clearly is, and it would bolster accountability efforts. Sam mentioned at the beginning various credible reports from all kinds of organizations, including Refugees International, that have led to this determination. I was on the ground in the first days when the mass exodus, almost 3 years ago now, when Rohingya were streaming across for their lives into Bangladesh. And I remember the consistency of the accounts that I heard from various Rohingya refugees was really striking. This was not something, a conclusion, the genocide conclusion was not something that Refugees International took lightly. But as we said in our own determination, and I'll quote, "But the evidence of the widespread systematic nature of the attacks on the Rohingya and the intent reflected in the rhetoric and actions of the Myanmar military leads inevitably to this conclusion. A genocide determination by the United States would bolster accountability efforts." Second, a genocide finding would bring much needed global attention that could help to prevent further atrocities. The danger has not passed, and some of my fellow panelists will talk a little bit more about the ongoing abuses in Myanmar right now, or Burma, as it's also known. The fact is, as the UN fact-finding mission has concluded, the Rohingya continue to face a high risk of genocide today. The gravity of a genocide determination would help to bring attention to let Myanmar know that the world's eyes are on them and can help to prevent further atrocities. Third, a designation would help to sustain and increase international attention and help to rally further measures of pressure, such as targeted sanctions. The United States has helped in sanctioning the highest levels of the Myanmar military. There's more that can be done, including sanctions on Myanmar military-owned enterprises. A lot of other countries haven't even gone that far, so it's really important to bring other countries along. We believe a genocide determination can help to rally that global support. And fourth, a genocide determination would be a sign of solidarity, both to the Rohingya refugees themselves and to countries that are hosting Rohingya refugees. Bangladesh hosts some million Rohingya refugees and is really struggling with hosting them. And it would go a long way to show solidarity that the United States is with them in providing refuge and finding a solution for the Rohingya people. And it would help to encourage the Bangladeshi government to avoid negative policies that could curtail the rights of Rohingya refugees as long as they need to stay there in the country in Bangladesh. And it would also help to rally sustained international humanitarian aid, which will unfortunately need to be continued in Bangladesh as long as the Rohingya have to stay there. I want to be clear that a genocide determination, we do not believe it to be a silver bullet. We know there's much more that can be done, but to repeat, as I said in the beginning, we believe it is the single most important and influential move that the US government can take right now to help to support further efforts that hopefully will eventually create the conditions where Rohingya can safely return to their homes. I'll close by referencing the words of Rohingya refugees that I've spoken with, and then I'll turn over to Rohingya voices that can say everything a lot better than I can. But on the visits that I've taken over the last several years to camps and meeting with Rohingya refugees, one of the first things they ask for is for accountability. As one of the Rohingya refugees, Rezwan, who I spoke with recently, the way he put it was, Rohingya are still at risk of further acts of genocide. A genocide determination by the US can change our fate. The world needs to call it genocide. I ask you to please join us and join Rezwan and others in signing the petition that you can find at refugeesinternational.org, which we will deliver with all of those signatures to the State Department ahead of August 25th, the 3-year mark of when the mass exodus of Rohingya out of Myanmar. With that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan. And it is now my honor and pleasure to introduce Yasmine Ullah, who is a Rohingya activist and refugee born in Myanmar. She is the president of Rohingya Human Rights Network. Yasmine.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor to be part of this event, be part of this campaign. As Sam had mentioned, I'm a Rohingya. I was born in Rakhine State during the waves of massacre and violence and human rights abuses against Rohingya by the Myanmar military in the 1990s. The only reason why I'm here with you all today was because my mother decided that the reality in Myanmar, where women, men, children face daily ridicule, arbitrary arrests, sexual harassment, injustice on every single level, that created all the barriers possible to ensure that none of us succeeded. She decided that that was not good enough for her and not good enough for me. She took me as a 3-year-old on several dangerous journeys because there was no better way. And she herself was frightened at that point. We smuggled ourselves through sea and then through land so that we could seek a new life in Thailand, hoping that it would be safer than what we've left behind. I was raised in Thailand. Time and time again, I was faced with the repeated reality of constantly having to run away, fleeing from who I am, and having to lie about, the fact that I was not a Burmese, and fleeing from the immigration system that looks to only arrest and retaliate against you, and not rehabilitate or rebuild, seeing that there's such a disadvantage of being, or calling myself a Rohingya for almost in my entire life. I believed that maybe if I changed enough things about me, the color of my skin, the beliefs in my heart, or who I was as a person, just maybe that country that didn't want me would change its course, although that was not the case. So I started belittling my own culture, my language, and refused to connect to my roots. Years later, I realized that in that process, I slowly cut myself into pieces so that I can fit into this box that was never designed for me in the first place. No matter what I do, even if I lose my life over it, I would never be enough. This is the pinnacle of what refugees experience on a daily basis. The struggles that we often have to face alone without states proactively adhering to the covenant to protect, to promote human rights, turned into the reality of us being neglected by humanity as a whole. It's this helplessness that we feel even after being able to resettle in a new country, hoping for a new life to start, but being completely paralyzed by the fact that our family members are still persecuted day in and day out. For years, the pain had been so numbing that I decided that even if I tried, I would not be able to fix anything. And the dehumanization, the disenfranchisement of Rohingya as a people is just too big for me to deal with, too complicated. It took another wave of massacre and violence back in 2017 for me to realize that even if I couldn't affect any change in a drastic way, I needed to try. And if not, I will lose everything and everyone who ever loved me. So I began writing and speaking up more and more about the issues, raise public awareness in Canada, and inform policies at the representatives. I began to start speaking up and inform policies and try to engage with different nation states of the issues at hand. And it has been 3 years since the massacre, the rape, the torching of over 300 villages, and many unspeakable horrors that took place. Even after my sisters and brothers sought refuge in Bangladesh, the horrors continued. The restrictive livelihood, and where many of them would feel that their future is slipping away every minute of the day. Imagine living in a small tent without plastic sheets, imagine living in a small tent made out of plastic sheets and bamboo sticks that does not ventilate well. Imagine not being able to eat anything else but rice and lentil every single day, and only once a day. What would it do to your body? What would it do to you mentally? Imagine not being able to work and being stuck at home sharing a few handspans of the space with your family of 5 or more. Imagine feeling isolated because the family separation and not having access to internet and other means of communication with families who are still left behind in Myanmar at risk of being persecuted and being killed by the Myanmar authorities. During this global pandemic alone, the already destitute situations in the camps have worsened due to factors like foreign aid workers being ordered to leave the country. Many Rohingya families have had to deal with food ration shortage and not being able to have a proper meal, further exacerbating the malnutrition crisis, especially in children. While we on the Western Hemisphere are battling with reinforcing the washing of the hands and wearing the mask, the water shortage, where some of the camps completely ran out of water, makes it impossible for one to observe preventive measures like washing the hands many, many times during the day when you don't even have water to drink. At this time, little children are stuck at home, not having places to go. Children's spaces have been closed. Healthcare accessibility have been a challenge. First, because most of the refugees just don't have internet access or access to life-saving information. And many fear that if they had gone to the healthcare facilities, they would be persecuted for being sick, and they would be separated from their families. This is the people that were already struggling and at an even higher risk of the health issues because of their underlying conditions like diabetes and hypertension because of the stress-related living condition. Psychiatric care and support for those who've been traumatized badly have lessened, especially for rape victims and sexual and gender-based violence victims. Many decided to leave the camps because of all of the above and more, on an unsafe journey on the boat to other countries, only to be branded illegal immigrants or illegal entry of refugees, and not being treated well at all in the same in the countries in the same region. All of this is a continuation of genocide that we haven't talked about, and it doesn't end for us. It doesn't end in 10 years. It doesn't end unless every single one of us actually find the refuge and find the solace and are at peace at the conditions that are around us, as well as being able to seek the support that we need. There is a direct line that I can draw from my own family when my grandmother lost her entire family because of the persecution in 1942 until today, that my entire family inside Myanmar are still living in fear every single day. Survivors and those and the victims are at risk of re-victimization, and they cannot wait forever for justice when trauma is so entrenched within our own existence. And I would like to suggest this. Justice has to be restorative and transformative, and it most certainly cannot be reached in Myanmar given the status quo with its current constitution allowing the military to veto any sort of positive changes. One of the few things that you could do is learn more about us if you don't know about us. Talk to your representative if you think that this is a worthwhile cause, and donate and sign the petition that Refugees International had actually put in the work for. Without the genocide determination from the US and many allied nation states, support for the refugees will slowly dwindle down. And that is the worst nightmare that we could imagine. Not imagining the current conditions are already bad, but imagine the sort of fundings and less donations coming in. The refugees will just living through hell. Please don't let this be another moment that we forget our history and our hopes to make amends. Rohingya need to feel supported and protected. We need to feel as humans as anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmine. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you all Wei Wei Nu. She is a Rohingya activist and former political prisoner in Myanmar. She is a fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She is a co-founder of Justice for Women and the founder and director of the Women Peace Network, Arakan. Wei Wei.
Thank you very much, Sam. And it's an absolute honor to have this opportunity to speak at this important and timely event. And it's I'm so glad to join all of you today. My dear sister Yasmine, Dan, Tom, and of course you, Sam. It is hard. Thank you so much, Yasmine, first of all, for sharing your experience, your struggle, and all of everything that you went through. I'm so sorry for that. And I'm so sorry for all, sorry. Just give me 1 second. I'm really sorry for all the suffering of my people. I'm actually expected to share my story and my experience as well. But as a Rohingya, I just want to say that we actually feel like we're very tired of sharing our stories. And I feel like I've shared my stories a million times. And also my brothers and sisters in the refugee camps, they shared the stories many, many times over and over. And it's so tiring. Now we need to see the actions. We need your actions now. As my sister Yasmine shared with you, each and every one of us suffered so deeply at the individual level and carry this trauma as a group. I actually experienced the firsthand, witnessed the firsthand violations, the abuses against my people since I was very little. And I still remember I was very young and my cousin has to run away because the police chased him and he had to flee from the country. It was in early 1990s. And my father was taken in front of me by a police car after the 1990 elections, just because he was targeted because he was Rohingya and also because he was active in politics and he was an elected parliamentarian in 1990 elections. And he came back after 1 month and he decided to move to Yangon, and he knew that things are coming bad. Things are going to be very bad for the people, for its people. And he decided to choose to move to Yangon to be involved in the politics more actively, as well as to save our future, to have, to give us opportunity to study and to grow up, with some level of human dignity, which we don't get. We might not, otherwise we wouldn't get in Rakhine State. And I can be just straightforward today that I was thrown into jail at the age of 18 with my father, my mother, my sister, and my brother. Not just because my dad was a leader in Burmese democracy movement, but actually because who we are as Rohingya. Today, I see myself as a lucky one among many other brothers and sisters and the suffering of my people. Surviving 7 years in the world most notorious prison, insane prison in Myanmar for 7 years, and still being able to speak up for truth and justice. I see myself as a lucky one. And not many of us are lucky like me or Yasmine. That's why it is essential that we put effort and we take actions now. And our people are targeted for this brutal campaign by the Burmese military as a group, as who they are, as a people. Burmese military and government remove our human dignity because of who we are. When they excluded our ethnicity name from the Burmese nationality list, when they revoke our citizenship status, when they impose restrictions on our movement, when they limit our ability to marry and give birth, when they restrict access to education, healthcare, and even nutrition, it was all as a group. Yet, the world has failed to take actions and respond as a group issue, as a group matter. And the worst came in 2017, where our people were targeted by well-organized and systemic killing of women, men, and children, rape and mutilation, burning houses, and removing 2/3 of our populations from their land and home. And as a result, more than 800,000 people become refugees and living in destitute camp today and facing many other risks at the time of COVID-19, as Yasmine has explained. Yet the military didn't stop. The arbitrary arrest, torture, killing continues until today. And the civilian government is actually following the policies and practices from the Myanmar military regime and publicly protecting the military. They have actually protected military from the beginning. Military and its conduct in Rakhine State during the clearance operations, at the international level and until now. Even after the International Court of Justice ruling on the provisional measures, the government of Myanmar continued to implement the genocidal policies and practices against our people. For instance, I would just like to explain it among many other daily suffering and the situations of the people. I will just try to give three facts and three contexts here, how they are continuing this campaign. First of all, the policies around the restrictions of the freedom of movement result in serious deprivations of education, healthcare, and nutrition. Basically, they cannot work, they cannot make money, or they cannot even go to their own farm to get, to make food for their families. And there is very little access to the healthcare, and there is almost no education for the higher educations, like for example, universities. Majority of our kids are not able to go to the school, the even basic school, but the only minorities who lives in the city area, they have some certain level of access to the educations at the primary and secondary school. And last week we have even alongside with all these persecutions, last week we had results from the matriculations exam in Burma, and we have at least 3 Rohingya students, 10 matriculation students receive all distinctions in all subjects, including the Burmese language, and it's extraordinary. And I'm afraid these kids might not have ability to go to the education, to university, to join the university due to the restrictions and denial of education for our students since 2012. for the university students, for university educations. And ability to live freely as people. These, I mean, the restrictions on the freedom of movement actually remove their ability to live as a people, as human even. My cousins in the Rakhine state describe their life as living in open prison and being even treated like criminals without committing any crimes, and joke with me that, even in the prison, you guys have a regular meal and proper shelter to sleep. So that's the feeling and the environment that they are living at this point, and the government continue to impose this freedom of restrictions on the freedom of movement. Secondly, during the violence attack against the Rohingya in 2012, there were about 150,000 people become displaced and living in the internally displaced person camps. And although some people took risks to take this dangerous boat to escape from the persecutions, there are still about 130,000 people remain in this internally displaced person camps in Rakhine state in very dire conditions without basic human rights. And these people are actually asking government to arrange their return to their places of origin and compensate for their losses. Government instead are planning to put them in the so-called model villages, which is segregated from the rest of the populations, and which will be built in the camp area as a permanent segregation camps. So that's the plan by this current Aung San Suu Kyi-led government is doing. Thirdly, NLD actually has put the conditions to our people, whether people in the IDP camps or people who might be returning from the refugee camps in Bangladesh or people living in Rakhine state, to take this card called National Verification Card, which people describe as genocide card. These national verification cards remove the Rohingyas' birthrights as full citizens of the country and legalize them as non-citizens. So some few people who had no choice but to take this national verification card, NVC, went through these processes and finally received naturalized citizenship card, which is actually the second-class citizenship in Myanmar. So with this naturalized citizenship, basically, it's unlike in US or any other European countries. The naturalized citizenships in Myanmar, all the rights are limited. It's come with the limited rights. For example, you can work, but you have limited right to own property, like property ownership. Or you can vote, but you cannot run in the election. And these naturalized citizenship can be revoked by any time by the authorities. So this is not only degrading our status in Myanmar and removing our both rights and equal rights as citizens of the country, but also creating divisions and classes among even remaining Rohingyas and denying the systemic persecutions against as a group, as Rohingya by the government itself. So, and now finally, elections is coming, scheduled for November in 2020 in Myanmar. The NLD government just disqualified first Rohingya candidate from running in the election. This is actually directly linked to the state's genocidal policy against our people. Despite long history of participations in Burma elections and politics, our people were disenfranchised in 2015. If NLD government is not carrying the genocidal policy and campaigns, they must change these policies and practices. Now what we're seeing now is, apart from this NLD's lofty statement by the president office and whitewash commissions of inquiry, the original plan and intentions continues against the Rohingya people, which the military, one of the military leader described as unfinished business. Meanwhile, military continue its violence attack against the Rohingya and other ethnic minorities throughout the country, especially at the civil war zone, with impunity. We need the US government and other governments around the world take leadership, recognize the suffering of our people, and call the crime by its name and take necessary actions. We need all of your help to end suffering of Rohingya and other ethnic people in Burma. I would just like to echo the Yasmine calls, to help us heal our pain and help us restore our human dignity and bring justice by raising awareness, writing to your representatives, senators, congressmen and women, asking US government, to make genocide determinations by joining the Refugee International campaign, and support the people who are working on the Rohingya group, working on the Rohingya and Rohingya groups directly, and the refugee in general. And also ask the US Congress to pass the Burma Act. Finally, ask the US government to add sanctions on the military and its own businesses. If you join us, I believe that we can bring light and hope for the people who need you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Weiwei. And now let me introduce my friend, Thomas Sadoski, who is an acclaimed actor, well known for his role in the newsroom, which is where I first met him. Like me, he's a Refugees International Emeritus Board member. Using his platform and his commitment, he champions human rights issues. And notably, he has shed and continues to shed light on the plight of the Rohingya. Tom.
Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon. It's an honor to be asked to speak alongside all of these tremendous individuals. Beginning in August of 2017, the Myanmar security forces committed widespread and systematic attacks against the Rohingya. Among those attacks were the unlawful killing of civilians, including children and infants, torture, rape, and other sexual violence, arson attacks, and the destruction of more than 350 villages. Between August and December of 2017, almost 800,000 ethnic Rohingya civilians were forced to flee their homes. Now, this was not an organized exodus. Too often, I think that we have in our own mind our cultural migration images, our own cultural migration images. When we hear that phrase, right? For Americans, I think that we subconsciously flash to this sort of images of the Great Depression or the Dust Bowl, right? These tragic sepia tone images of trucks loaded up and tied down, rattling off some dusty road in search of a better life. And that was hard, to be sure, but for the purposes, our purposes today, I want to put into your mind the images of what that reality was for members of the Rohingya people. There was no time to prepare. Neighbors, family members, shot, hacked to pieces, raped to death around you. Fires lit with the intention of burning your entire village to the ground, fleeing on foot, overwhelmingly without food, water, shelter, clothing, into the countryside, organizing on the fly on how to get to the border and get to safety. The young carrying the old and the infirm, fording rivers, again, on foot, and behind you, all along, driving relentlessly, the horrors of torture, mass rape and death, sparing no one, not even children or infants. These are the images that the Rohingya people see when they hear the phrase flee their homes. Now, the Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of Genocide is universally binding on all state as well as non-state actors, and that is a very important distinction. As the facts of these crimes that have been committed are not in dispute by any reasonable person, a primary point of focus in further discussions on this issue will ultimately be the discussion of intent. Now, in a comprehensive report that was done by 4 to 5 Rights, easily among the most well-versed organizations that is working today, as well as findings in the case brought to the ICJ by the Gambia and a report by Refugees International itself. The facts necessary to make a case for intent are indisputable, and they are overwhelming. Among the most startling findings are the revelation that the Myanmar army began arming and training paramilitary and civilian groups in October of 2016, long before the horrific events that bring us here today. Once the August 2017 military crackdown began, these paramilitary groups were activated, and damningly, they were directed by the military and riot police in the perpetration of genocidal crimes. Now, I take a parenthetical here to note that these paramilitary and civilian groups were not limited to adults, okay? Local children were armed and guided to join in the slaughter as well. Now, it must be restated that the commission of these atrocities happened in conjunction with and addition to the military itself committing its own parallel and equally as horrific crimes of infanticide, mass rape, and mass murder. It is important to note that the instances of these paramilitary armament, training, utilization, they need not stand alone to make the case for intent, although they could. Additionally, during this same time period, which is before the events of 2017, state police and military forces conducted multiple campaigns. One was a campaign to disarm Rohingya people, which was confiscating knives, farming tools, household items, anything that could be perceived or used as weaponry. Another campaign in which fencing and structures around Rohingya homes and villages were removed in order to provide both improved line of sight to police and more advantageously to a force which is preparing for genocidal efficiency, remove or create a lack of defensive armature. There was an additional campaign of suspending humanitarian aid and access to humanitarian organizations to the Rohingya people, which furthered the dehumanization suffered by the people. And as it speaks to intent, it weakened the population and it removed any potential third-party witnesses from the planned genocide. Furthermore, in Northern Rakhine State, a Muslim-only curfew was adopted and enforced, and subsequently, and this is again, solidifying the intent question, thousands of non-Rohingya citizens were evacuated from that area prior to the operations taking place. And finally, a campaign was enacted to build up an unusually stout military presence, one that was dramatically out of proportion to the supposed threat faced by the state. Now, that's the legalese-ish, right? The voices and the stories that you have just heard, speak more clearly to the moral and the ethical need for the global community to respond immediately and with unshakable unity than anything that I could ever say. The legal case laid out by Refugees International, 4 to 5 Rights, the Gambia, any other government and non-governmental bodies, it is clear, it is complete. So, what remains? What remains is that we, as a country of citizens who celebrate courage and refuse injustice, have our leaders stand up with the integrity of our national principles and the strength to represent those principles when it matters, and it matters now. There is a lot of political talk these days about greatness. The moment that greatness becomes real, tangible, and evident is the moment when that which is right and just burns so brightly in the heart that the body picks up the heavy standard of service, and it strikes out, often alone, but gathering a multitude, and it endures and endures and endures until the work is done. The time has long since passed for our country, our people who claim that we are baptized in the love of righteousness, to cast off the cowardice of idleness and inaction and stand up for and beside the Rohingya people and declare in a unified voice that we will not despise or abhor the affliction or the afflicted. We will not hide our face from them. That when we are cried out to, we will listen. And we will declare the inescapable truth that the horrors of what happened to the Rohingya people was a genocide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now we're going to move to some questions from all of you who have been participating. And let me start now. The first question is, what will a United States genocide determination mean for the Rohingya people in Bangladesh and Myanmar? And I think it would be great if Yasmine and Weiwei both pitched in on this. Yasmine?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
What will a United States genocide determination mean for the Rohingya people in Bangladesh and in Myanmar?
First of all, it would mean that the United States stand with the people of Myanmar who have been suffering for decades. It doesn't just extend to the Rohingya population alone. It extends to many other groups of minorities that live and suffered all throughout the years of military dictatorship. And it would mean that many other allied nations or nation states that think alike, or nation states that look up to the United States will join force or will follow suit soon after, because they're looking for an example. They're looking to see whether a country with such influence like the United States would do something on this case, would actually stand by its value. It would mean that our people and our issues would remain at the forefront in every other discussions that we have on the international human rights. It would mean that donations and support that goes to the refugee camps and possibly many other refugee populations in various different countries in the same region, that they would be supported as well. There could be so many other reasons that I can list out, but this is just a few things that would, follow suit right after the genocide determination, and hoping that the genocide determination would be made by the United States. But all in all, it would just help vindicate our entire existence and our pain, our suffering, our trauma, our existence as human. It would help legitimize us. It would help emphasize the reality that the Myanmar military is being watched, and that it would not be able to get away with impunity that it had enjoyed for the past many decades. So for us to be able to push forth that sort of reality, for us to be able to push forth the genocide determination, calling it what it is, it would mean that we would be, we would have friends, and that's, I think that's something that we haven't been able to say for a long time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And Weiwei, you were a political prisoner in Burma, and you still have family in the country. So maybe you could speak a little bit to what a genocide determination by the United States would mean to the Rohingya who are still in the country, and what message it would send to the Burmese authorities.
Yeah, so in addition to what Yasmine has said, I think it is very, very important, and it's as equally important as Myanmar recognizing Rohingya as Rohingya, because I think it will touch the heart of the problem and the root cause of the problem. over this, several decades of persecutions, no countries and, no government has actually touched the root causes of the problem. The root of the problem itself is targeting this group as a Rohingya and denying their entire identity, denying the entire existence and the name. So when you recognize and declare, make genocide determinations, it would mean that the Burmese government had, may not get any more excuses to kind of avoid to address the root causes and the system itself, the policies itself. Right now, with these various accountability processes and effort, they are trying to kind of get it away from it, from the group element of it, and trying to avoid addressing root causes by, for example, as I said, for instance, the military, studying kind of criminal investigations on one incident, or for a few incidences, and trying to punish the subordinate rather than superior, or trying to address the policies rather than trying to address the impact rather than policies and the root causes itself. I think these determinations will push to the all governments as well as the Burmese government to really, direct them to the right directions, and this will lead to address the root causes of the problem and restoring the Rohingyas in a more broader sense of justice as a group.
Thank you, Wei Wei. I want to ask Dan if there's anything he wants to add to this, but before I do, Tom, is there something that you think it would be pertinent in this broad discussion for just the average American to be aware of about the situation of the Rohingya and how it speaks to us just as ordinary American citizens?
I think that, at this moment in our country, we're coming to grips with a pretty profoundly broken cultural narrative, one that has disregarded the suffering of too many people for too long, that has either by intent or oversight whitewashed or glossed over the suffering of marginalized populations in our country. I think that there is no time like the present for citizens in our country to take a look at how other populations in the world are suffering the indignity of having their own cultural identity and their own cultural history not just glossed over or written around, but actively removed. You have to understand that the intent of genocide, okay, the intent of genocide is to remove from existence and from history an entire population of people. Okay, this isn't just about pushing people to the border and getting them out, moving on. It is about removing from existence and cultural history the existence of an entire population of people. We have some experience with that in our country. And it is something that we have never fully atoned for within our own borders, but it is something that we can, I like to think of it as a living amends that we can make, not only to the people in our own cultural past, but to the world, that we as a population stand up for marginalized people and protect them from being written out of history. There's no sort of counter argument to be made to that. once you realize the reality of the situation, and once you understand that this is not just something that happened, as has so beautifully been stated by Yasmine Ullah, it's not something that has just happened in 2017. This is something that happened in the 90s. This is something that happened in the 70s. This is something that went back and back and back and back. The crimes against the Rohingya people have been going on in Myanmar for a very long time. And we are, as a human society, paying attention now in a way that we, frankly, have never had the opportunity to, and have never had the courage to before. I'm hoping that with this moment, run of the day folks everywhere, not just in our country, but everywhere, will have the courage and the compassion to stand up and say that we are not going to allow human voices to be written out of existence.
Thank you, Tom. Dan?
Yeah, I would just say that that's well said, and I would just emphasize the thing to know is that the Myanmar government claims that the Rohingya people do not exist. You've heard from two right here. You've heard about what has happened to them. This is their identity. They're telling you how they identify. This is a people, and they've suffered one of the worst mass atrocities in modern times. And you've heard from Yasmine Ullah. I've spoken to so many Rohingya refugees who say how important accountability is, and how important what the U.S. does, how important that is. So the U.S. taking a leadership role on this, calling it what it is, it really does make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have a question for Yasmine that's sort of related to this. You were in The Hague for the start of the Gambia's genocide case against Burma at the International Court of Justice last fall. And tell us what that experience was like, and what you expect from the ICJ case and other accountability efforts that are going forward.
It was very surreal to be able to sit inside the court, just feet away from various different Burmese officials, including Aung San Suu Kyi. I never actually expected or even dreamt of being able to see a day that we would get to be in court over the persecution of our people for the past few decades. It was a really good step in the right direction, but obviously the Gambia needs support, needs a lot of support from various different nation states, as many as possible, in order for this case to be moved forward, and for Myanmar authorities, for Myanmar military to actually feel like they're being watched and feel the heat that's coming through. Otherwise, the attempt or the process itself would be meaningless. And here is the challenges that I've heard from various different international lawyers and various observers, that the genocidal intent is going to be extremely difficult to prove, because it has to be written it has to be written in stone, or it has to be written in a document, or something that's so tangible. I actually don't have enough training or enough knowledge or education to be able to identify whether or not that's true. But the reality is that whether or not we get the genocide determination from the United States, whether or not we get the genocide determination or decision or the ruling from the ICJ, our people are going to continue to live in this destitute condition, in the camps, outside, in the ASEAN, or they would be, leaving, going through the dangerous journey, being left at sea. All of this is going to continue to happen if we take our eyes off of the situation for 1 minute.
And so, Dan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we're pretty much out of time. And I wonder, Dan, if you wanted to bring this to a close with an answer to a question that came in that says, that asks what the biggest obstacle to the United States making a genocide determination might be. And then maybe you would like to bring the meeting to a close.
Sure. It's tough to speak to the policymakers as to why they wouldn't find this. I mean, we talked about the State Department's own comprehensive survey that was done that laid out all of the things that had happened, and the group that carried out that survey of Rohingya refugees, they independently came up with their own determination of compelling evidence of genocide. So I think there are always the legal questions that go on, but and about intent and how Tom talked about that. I'll say that it's pretty strong, and we have there was a letter from various legal experts that will be coming out very soon to just hear from the experts of how that really does fit the level of intent. So, but yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining and put in one last plug for the petition to please go to refugiesinternational.org. Again, not a silver bullet, but something that we believe is a really strong step that can lead to all the other things that need to happen. And again, want to thank the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum for co-sponsoring this event, and to all my fellow panelists and for Sam for moderating. Thank you.
Well, Eric, it turns out that Eric is here, and he's going to come on and give us final words. Eric Schwartz.
Thank you, Sam. Can everyone hear me? Just shake your head if that's a yes. Well, that's wonderful. Well, first, it's really been an honor for me to have had the chance to hear this crucial discussion, and I happily was here for all of it. By now, I think we all have heard the comment of Martin Luther King, that while the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. To be fair, we live in times where reasonable people might question this proposition, especially in the context of the discussion that we've had today. But for the purposes of the matter at hand, it really doesn't matter, does it? What matters is that the world has seen victories for human rights that were achieved against all odds. That in itself has to be a source of comfort, of sustenance, of inspiration for all of us as we press for measures to help the Rohingya achieve justice. And advocates for justice must also be sustained by the knowledge that smart and sustained advocacy is also a source of solidarity to those who have suffered at the hands of the Burmese state. After Refugees International made our judgment that the crimes against the Rohingya constituted genocide, we knew we needed to take additional action, so we launched this petition to urge Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to make a genocide determination, simply to state what we know to be the case. We knew that grassroots and grass tops advocacy and support would be essential, and that means we need your support. Everyone on this webinar. The link to the petition, I hope, is in the chat box, because that's what my remarks say. And please add your name. In less than 2 weeks, we will deliver the petition to the Secretary of State and urge him to stand on the right side of history. Finally, and really from the bottom of my heart, thanks again to panelists and friends, Yasmine Ullah, Weiwei Nu, Dan Sullivan, Dan, who has been so tireless in leading our efforts on this critical matter. I also want to thank Thomas Sadoski and Sam Waterson, board members emeritus, but board members who just keep giving to the cause of justice. And I want to thank you all for this compelling and this necessary conversation today, and my deep appreciation to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum for co-sponsoring this event. So thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your day.